Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Nick Akers, and we're going to talk to you about this company you recently purchased in the last couple of years. I'm really looking forward to this. I spent so much time talking to advisors and lawyers and brokers and due diligence people. My goal over the next few months is to get more people like you that's actually in the trenches, done the deal. You created a search, you found a company, and now you're the operator. So looking forward to hearing your story, looking forward to kind of hearing how you got to where you are and how it's going. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Cool. We always start with the origin story, the joke. Hey, you were born and now you ended up on a show about mergers and acquisitions. How in the hell did you end up on a show like this? It's kind of going around. What got you into buying a company? I could see that you've been in the industry for quite a while. So what got you to buy your first company?
I think it was essentially a long, multi-year, perhaps multi-decade path of realizing I probably can't work for anybody else. So this was pretty much the only choice.
Yeah, I can get that. A lot of us are that way, right? I make a horrible employee. I've tried it a few times. Been at quite a few companies where I've only made it for a year or two before I told the CEO what I thought about them, like what I thought about how things are working. And sometimes that goes really well and things change, but most of the time that goes to where you need to go find somewhere else to work.
Yeah.
So you're in the industry, you figured out, man, I got to do this thing on my own. I imagine you did some startups. We all start that route. At some point, somebody triggers. For me, it was I was looking around to do what was next, and I seen some little webinar or something on it. They're talking about buying a business, and this is right around COVID, so right in the middle of COVID when you're really bored, staying at home a lot, watching extra videos. And I thought, well, okay, that's an interesting thing. Why start another one when I can go buy one? What was the catalyst for you that was kind of like, wait a second, I could buy one?
Well, I too did the startup thing. And for me, it was the very first thing I did right out of college. So started what ended up being a venture capital funded company. I was 22, 23. Did that for about 8 years. That was a good run. I obviously learned a lot and had to learn everything about running a business straight away. And I came from a technical education background that like never had one business or accounting class at all. So it was a really good learning experience. And then went into a little bit more of traditional career roles, but there was always some thread of ownership or potential ownership at these other companies that I worked at before deciding it's time for me to go chart my own path, really create my own mark. And that evolved initially in working with some private equity firms, kind of like an independent sponsor. I
Hmm.
didn't even know what an independent sponsor was, but that's what I was doing. I was sourcing deal opportunities myself. The private equity firm was giving me deal flow for us to look at together. And we pursued a number of opportunities, put LOIs out, but this was right. It was during COVID and just kind of at the tail end of COVID. So the valuations were just completely insane, high teens, even low 20s. So we obviously never got anything done. But what I realized through doing that, and I was working with the private equity firms for probably 18 months. And towards the last 6 months of that, I realized I was on their timeline, not my timeline, right? They're getting deals done in their firm, but I needed to get Nick's deal done. So I learned about search funds. I had never heard the term before, literally just learned about it from an ad on LinkedIn, which
Hmm.
ended up being an ad from this accelerator that I joined, Novastone Capital. So that ad is what triggered me to, hey, this search fund thing sounds really cool. It's a structured way that an individual can go buy a small to medium sized business. And that really hit a chord with me. And it was an exciting journey to get to where we are now.
And there's so many different avenues to go down this, right? There's SBA loans and there's search funds that sometimes they use SBA loans. And then there's, self-funded, there's creative structural deals. And I was telling you before we hit the record button about some people who've done sell leasebacks where there's real estate attached and it's worth something. So you can use that as part of the down payment or pay for, if you're finding a unicorn, pay for your business with the real estate. So the fact that you went to two different avenues, you like the independent sponsor, which is around most of our guys, our listeners probably haven't heard of. I've interviewed one guy that made some serious money as an independent sponsor. Bakari is his name, Bakari Akil, very unique name, but he did two $20+ million deals and as an independent sponsor and did really well with them. But that's just an avenue a lot of people hadn't heard of. I hadn't heard of it until he came on here, and so I started researching. Like that's a really cool way to do things too. So you started that route, and then realized, wait a second, if I do this, if I break away from this and do my own search, then you can define your timeline, you can define your search criteria, and probably pull the trigger on something that you would like more than what your backers would like. Now, this company that you worked with, this what was it again? Nova something?
Novastone Capital.
Nova Stone
Mhm.
Capital. Now, did they provide some of the funding, or was it a mix? Like a lot of these things are a mix. You bring some capital, they bring some capital, and then you do some debt raise and stuff like that, or how did it work?
Sure. So their program has evolved since
Mhm,
I was in it as in during the search phase. And Novastone Capital Advisors started their search fund accelerator program in Europe. So they had been in Europe for a couple of years and wanted to bring the program to the USA. So I was their first USA based searcher. Now there's, maybe
mhm,
25 of us in the US that are either in the search phase or post acquisition. And the deal structure looks very much like traditional search, the economics for the searcher. It's pretty much follows those economics. What attracted me to the Novastone program is they help you very quickly raise either from them directly or through a consortium of family offices that they partner with your search capital. So that part, getting that done, very fast and smooth was attractive to me. But they also have pretty significant staff. I describe to folks it almost looks like a small boutique private equity firm because they have in-house legal, they have in-house deal origination capabilities. Their M&A team that really, they're the Excel wizards. I'm not
mhm.
one. So I viewed partnering with them as really improving the odds of being successful. And I think that proved to be the case for me.
I've only run into 2 or 3 companies that do what you were telling me they did. I just interviewed a guy who's starting one since in its infancy, a 25-year veteran of the private equity attorney, who's now created a little private equity company that's doing exactly what you're talking about. They're sponsoring first-time buyers and helping them do all the legal and stuff. But I think it's an extremely lucrative business model. We were talking about before the show is the Y Combinators of the venture capital world. I'm surprised there's not more of this style for the guys who are buying companies because you're not taking a gamble on an idea. You're picking up revenue generating profitable companies. So I'm glad they're not. As a matter of fact, we probably should just quit chatting about that because the more of those guys that are in it, the harder the search becomes. So now tell me you said you told me before the show that you went to lunch with a broker and then you had this listing, right? You already kinda know what industry you wanted to be in and kinda because of your background, your technical background, you kinda know you wanted to be in the IT space, or what was your prior to talking to him, what did the search look like? Did you have a buyer's box that was well defined?
Yeah, so my background before going on this search phase, even with the private equity
Mhm,
folks, was in the specialty chemical sector. So I had developed an acquisition thesis that was hyper specific within that industry. And when I presented this to private equity firms, everybody got the value proposition. And, so it was very easy to get people to line up and help support that. When I transitioned into what we think of as kind of the traditional search fund approach, I came in to this Novastone Capital Group with a variation of that hyper specific specialty chemical search thesis. And that was part of the program, at least at that time, is Novastone was looking for what they call mid-career professionals. So they're not doing the right out of MBA folks going into search. They're looking for somebody with 15, 20 years of track record and industry specific experience. So I began my search looking in specialty chemicals, leveraging my network just as I had during the private equity time, and was, of course, thinking I would pull something from a proprietary search like a lot of people start out doing. But I realized about 6 months into that effort, I was wasting a lot of time. I developed some LOIs and those types of things, but I just was not dealing with serious sellers, and it just taken way too long. And also, so there was that learning experience, and then the valuations, even on the smaller side of specialty chemical, were remaining very robust. And as I, was talking to the Novastone folks about, where I'm at in pricing, it became clear that that industry was not going to line up with the entry multiples that is expected for a search fund. We all generally know search fund is probably less than a six. You're probably looking for three, four, five-ish. And specialty chemical, the lowest I was seeing was like seven or eight. And that was for really messy businesses. So those two things weren't lining up. My search started in December of 21. So about the summer of 22, I decided to pivot because I was starting to become concerned about the ticking clock that we have, right? This was a 24-month search phase.
I was gonna ask how long, 'cause they usually give you 24 or 36 months, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So this program is 24 months with the opportunity to extend it under the appropriate circumstances. So in the summer of 22, I decided to pivot and become generally industry agnostic, but focus heavily, if not exclusively, on brokered deals. So that, of course, instantly generated a lot of deal flow. It doesn't mean it was good deal flow, but it was something. And, just trying to do all the things that all the searchers, all the tricks we all know, leveraging my local network in St. Louis and meeting folks. So I had reached out, just cold called one of the well-known brokers in town. We scheduled a lunch. I had no idea what listings he had. He didn't know me at all. We sit down to lunch. This gentleman had never heard of a search fund. So we spent a lot of time explaining that. I mean, the guy was basically interviewing me and probably trying to figure out, do you even have any money? Like, what am I wasting my time here for? But, we had a good conversation for about an hour. And then he just brought up, he's like, hey, I've got this services business. I know you come from a manufacturing background. Do you want to take a look at it? Didn't tell me the name of it at that point, but that lunch was in September of 22. And then we spent from September until December. I think we signed the LOI on December 23rd or 24th. He eventually revealed the name of the company. It was what we acquired, STL Communications. It's a IT managed service provider. Went under LOI just right before Christmas, and then we closed on May 5th of 23. So right at about an 18-month mark for the whole search phase, which I believe is pretty standard. Takes about
Yeah.
18 months for folks to be successful.
Yeah, it seems about average. Describe what was going on from the LOI, which was in December, until you said May, right? You're talking 5.5 months?
Yep. And we certainly expected for it to take about 3 months, right?
Mhm,
But things happen, both on the sell side and the buy side. Nothing major, but just certain things have to get done. So, actually the data room was not prepared when the LOI was signed. So I think
mhm.
there was some amount of time required for the seller to get organized for a real data room. And then we just did the typical things that you find in diligence. We didn't have any really major findings that caused a retrading discussion or anything like that. We ended up paying the price that we indicated in the LOI. So I feel good about that. I think there's some integrity there. So yeah, it was all fine. And then one Monday morning at 8 o'clock, I'm sitting in this guy's conference room in a suit, and he drags everybody in. And I think he talked for maybe 30 seconds, like maybe, and said, hey, guess what, everybody? I sold the business, and here's the new CEO, Nick, standing over there in the corner. And there was a bit of pandemonium that happened. So some people crying, and that was quite the interesting day.
Yeah, there's whole sections of business books that are, geared towards how people deal with change, right? "Who Moved My Cheese" is the one that keeps coming to my mind, but people do panic at that first initial, "What do you mean you sold the business? I mean, where's my job going?" Right? I know people who are serial acquirers, they acquire multiple businesses, and they won't allow that conversation to happen on a Thursday or Friday because they don't want people
Mhm.
stewing all weekend. They make it happen not on Monday because they are and not in the beginning of the day on Tuesday. Usually do Tuesday, Wednesday, and they do it very structured. They have people go to work, get involved with stuff, and then they have a meeting right before lunch. And then they make sure there's plenty of work to do after, so they have to go back to work. And it's just, if you let people stew all weekend, you get people quitting on Monday because they're panicked, and it's just, especially in the smaller business world. So it didn't shock me when you said there was a little pandemonium going on. How did you handle that? Because you've got to now you're in almost reaction mode, right? You've got a bunch of people panicking. You need them to get back to work. You need them to develop a sense of rapport and trust with you. So I
Yep.
imagine there was just a series, a bunch of meetings with individual players and individual managers and stuff. But what did that look like? How did you rein that back in and get everybody on board?
Yeah, it was a number of things as you allude to, right?
Hmm.
I certainly had a speech prepared for that moment. I doubt anybody heard a word of it. And then, I spent the first couple weeks just doing a number of things. One, it's trying to not be in my office, right? Just constantly walking around, just being
Hmm.
visible, talking to folks, having one-on-one meetings, going to lunches, all of those types of things. And then maybe it was the first start of the first week after the close. I heard this idea from somebody else. I thought it was a good idea. It's not revolutionary, but I think it was it's a good gesture. We had an all company meeting in the conference room, and I had notebooks for everybody, nice notebooks for everybody, handed them all out, and basically gave the speech. Look, I'm not looking to change anything drastic here, but I want your feedback. So any ideas that you have had about the business or you come to have, write them down in this notebook. I can't promise I will do everything that you write down, but I can promise I'll listen to you. And I got feedback. I think that went a long way.
Hmm.
And some people did it. Not everybody's going to actually follow through with that,
Right.
but some people did, and we implemented a lot of what they requested. And again, I've heard other people talk about that. Just that simple gesture, right? Somebody asks you or makes a suggestion, and then you do it. That goes much further than I think most of us realize.
We talk about that a lot on this show. Is like somebody says, "Hey, I'm about to close this," and I kind of grin because it reminds me of like the dog that chases the car, right? What are you gonna do when you actually catch the car? So now you caught the car, and the first thing I always tell people is don't change anything for 3 months to 6 months. Just observe, and it's and before like make a list of everything you think you need to change along that process, right? That 5 to 6 months or three to 6 month process. And then I told her, we always talk about this, interview every employee, figure out what they need to change. And then look where your synergies are, what you think needs to change and what they need to change. And because they're going to have buy in on that stuff. So I love what you did because you look through that and go, you know what? I think that needs to change too. And that needs to change. And because it was their idea, their concept, they're more likely to be bought in and actually help with that. And now you build rapport with the things you see that needs to change that they just might not notice yet. So that's the only approach I've seen that works. I talked to a guy who bought a company in South Africa, an IT company, and he made a bunch of changes right off the bat. And he had 21, I think 21 was the number, 21 employees. He lost every single one of them within 30 days.
Well, we were fortunate to retain almost everybody, certainly
Mhm.
all of the key contributors and the folks that you want to stick around. And we did, I didn't, I've heard that wisdom of wait 6 months. I did not wait 6 months. I started changing things pretty fast. Just that's
Mhm.
my nature. But we did relatively, simple minor changes. That the most minor one we did was provide free coffee. There was not free coffee. I mean,
Mhm.
you got to have free coffee. So that's super easy. But one of the kind of the my favorite stories or instances that did happen very early on, I think it was maybe week three. I had the one of the top people in the company, top in terms of this is one of your A players.
Mhm.
This is key person, and they came into my office very early, very casually, and they're just like, "Oh, hey, good morning, Nick. Here's my resignation." And And they said, look, it has nothing to do with you. I didn't know the owner was selling the company. I was gone. I mean, just the timing worked out that I was interviewing and just had accepted just a couple days after the sale. So it's not personal to you, Nick, but sorry, see ya. So I said, well, hold on a second. Why don't you sit down and what's going on here? And I asked this person, a handful of questions to determine, what led them down the path to want to find a different situation. And they had a number of things, past grievances, all that type of stuff. And so I said, on a particular issue that this person I had, I said, no matter what the result of our discussion right now, whether you stay or leave, I'm going to fix that for you today. I'm going to resolve what that problem was. And the person, literally leaned back. They were stopped in their tracks. And this was a really, the issue was really important to this person. And one, being able to correct something like that is makes you feel pretty good to impact somebody in a positive way. And the person ended up changing their mind and staying and is one of my best people. I mean, it's just like that. I think that's the power of being in this position. It's one of my favorite stories that I've ever had.
That's a good turnaround too. Like he was already ready to go, and it happens. Every business that you acquire, there's going to be a certain subset of people who are already out there interviewing anyway, so they've kind of checked out, and then there's going to be another subset of people who they've already kind of all this joking around and these terms people throw in. They've already kind of quiet quitted anyway, and like the second you come in, they're already gone, and it's probably better
Sure.
for you as a business owner to have those people go ahead and find something else to do. Like I always joke around, there's no such thing as a bad employee. Even tell people like when I let people go, it's like you're not a bad employee. You're probably just a better employee for somebody else. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's the best thing. But when you step into a new environment, everything's changing. Being able to identify that and like your natural reaction to him was, oh, well, sit down. Let's have a conversation about that gave you a legs up. Number 1, you got to keep him, but number 2, somebody about to leave has there's no hold bars hold, right? There's nothing hidden. All the other employees would be afraid to tell you what's wrong in the company. That guy's gonna tell you the story. So,
Right.
you learned something and actually probably benefited the company overall just because he was at that point, right? You got information from him that had he not had another job and had he not ready to render his resignation, he probably would have taken 6 months to tell you if he ever told you at all.
I think that's right. And something you mentioned there made me think of another kind of surprise to me post acquisition. I just wasn't prepared for, we have a very unique point of view coming in here as the new CEO in that I don't have any ego in the history of the company, right? Whatever it is. Hey, we have XYZ CRM. Like I don't have any ego in that was my choice, so I've got to hold on to it whether it was a bad decision or not. And you extrapolate that over every part of the business. It's been a really interesting exercise for me, where somebody might criticize it or a customer might say something, whatever the situation is, I can look at it completely non-emotionally and objectively, and I think that's been a real benefit for me, at least, as we've kind of ran the business for the past 16 months.
So, I guess the next area goes into how did the business go? A lot of times when you buy something, you have this kind of a little dip, and then you start to bring it back up and start to increase production again and stuff. Did it stay pretty steady when you got a hold of it as far as revenue and profit and stuff? Or do you go through that typical learner's curve where you start making a little less money and have to get into a panic because something's changed?
So we've done well. Again, we closed in early May of 23. So if we look at just the calendar year of 23, we had greater than 10% top line revenue growth for that calendar year. So that was all great, and the bottom line stayed strong where it needed to be. One of the powerful things about this business and most IT managed service providers is the recurring revenue. That was certainly
Mhm.
one of the very attractive components to it. So it was very nice to have that security, cushion, predictability, whatever term you want to use. But we have a blend of the recurring revenue and project-based revenue. So last year was a good year. This year could be a good year. It's just, can we get all the work done and recognize the revenue? So
What is, I can guess what a communications company does, but tell us a little bit about what the product is. What type of services are you providing? I imagine it's not just phone systems, right? What do you guys install, manage, control? What is the product that you guys have?
Sure. I'll start specifically for this company and then perhaps a little bit broader for IT MSPs. This
Mhm,
company was founded in 1989, and at that time, and for some large percentage of its history, it was a telecom company. So dealing
mhm,
100% in voice. So maybe 10 years ago or so, the owner started to get into more of the traditional IT managed services. So these would be
mhm.
things like remote desktop, remote server management, cybersecurity, data backups on premise or in the cloud, cloud services, all of those types of activities. Communications is still a very big part of the business. You know, most people these days are using some type of cloud managed voice solution. Teams is one that everybody's familiar with, but typically more sophisticated businesses are relying on something a little bit more robust that integrates with their systems. UCaaS is the acronym, Unified Communications as a Service, which encompasses a lot of different communication methodologies, either internally or externally facing with your customers. So those are the things that we do. Just with the history of the company, the STL Communications name, I think, lends itself to connotate that it's a communications company, telephony company. So we're
Mhm.
actually we're rebranding, renaming the company. That was part of our pre-acquisition growth thesis. So current plans are right now, before the end of the year, we'll unveil our new name, new logo, and really with the idea of not pigeonholing us into a specific category to really represent the broad services and technologies that we do offer today.
Yeah, I date myself when I tell you I that's the era that I was in, right? I graduated high school in '90 and it was in, it was in tech by '93, '94. So, I got to see the big phone closets and the $200,000 PBX, I think what they call them, machines or where you had all the
Yes.
patch panels, and I've plugged more I've did the, what do they call it, punch cards or whatever? You're punching the wires into the punch boards. I've done that more often than I'd like to admit. I'm old enough to tell you that I used to do that to set up networking equipment. So we used to punch those into to punch boards too, or where you're networking offices together. And I got to see before I left the tech industry, we were starting to switch everything over to VoIP, voice over IP. So
Yep.
is there still? I imagine, and I still see that occasionally. Right now, I've been to a couple manufacturing plants where I walked into one and they still had old green screen Wayne computers and they had a telephone room, a big PBX like punch board room, but there's still a bunch of those. You would think now, and what we're sitting here in 2024, those phone systems went away in the late 90s. Voice over IP came around pretty well in the mid 90s, right? So I'm guessing it's been a while, but the fact that they're still out there, right?
We rip out 20-year-old phone systems all the time.
And replace them with something that had they had to replace that with the same type of system that they had in it, it would be 5 times more expensive. The newer machines and the newer voice over IP, for some reason, is or at least when I was replacing the stuff, was a fraction of the cost of the original equipment because it wasn't so proprietary. It's a lot more competitive, I guess.
That is one thing about this industry. You know, I don't want to label it purely as a commodity, but it's not too far off because we can all sell the same thing. I mean, there's really no barrier to repping any of the solution providers. And so, what I talked about a lot pre-acquisition and certainly post-acquisition is the only thing that we can do to set ourselves apart is deliver the best customer service possible.
Yeah.
So, if everybody has the same product, the only differentiator is how you take care of the customers. And that's been part of my previous career at the chemical company, for example. We would talk about what we're really selling is customer service, and our chemicals just come along with it. So really try to emphasize that approach here, having the customer be at the center of everything that we're doing and just giving them the best experience pre and post sale.
Yeah, I was in that space long enough, in the IT space long enough to know that the majority of things you have to go and in and fix are usually caused on the opposite side of the keyboard. My wife tells me,
Right.
"Hey, I've got a problem with" before she let me finally switch her over to a Mac, she used to come in here and tell me all the time, "Hey, there's something wrong with my computer." I was like, "Yeah, I think it's on this side of the keyboard. Let me see it for a second." Right? And she get mad at me, but now that we got her on a Mac, it never happens because they're harder to break. It's a hammer, you lift the lid, whack what you need to whack, and shut the lid. There's less problems to go through. That said, I don't miss my days in the IT world at all. I was one of the IT managers that everybody either loved me or hate me. The sales staff used to love to put all kinds of games and stupid stuff on almost every company I've ever been at on their computers. And when they call me and tell me there's something wrong with the computer, I just go, "Hold on a second," right? And I do something behind the scenes. Okay, now reboot your computer. And then when they reboot the computer, I had it factory reinstall it because we had an install server set up. And all I had to do is mark their machine for reinstall. And when they rebooted it, it would reinstall it from and put it all back the way it's supposed to go.
Yeah, it's a tough business. It's what we provide. Everybody needs it, but not
Mhm.
many people want to deal with it. So you struggle with that, and it's a 24/7 business. Yeah, I mean it never fails when there's a significant customer event. It's almost always at Friday at 4 o'clock.
Yeah. And it's usually it's somebody asked me a long time ago why I got out of computers. I said, "'Cause they're boring." Usually, a computer does exactly what it's programmed to do. It's very logical. It's easy to figure out. And if something broke on the computer, it's either, and I'm gonna be very crude right now, it's either the idiot behind the keyboard or the idiot that put it together. Something where somebody walked over and thought the thing looked messy, untangled all the wires, and then when they plugged it back in, they got something plugged in wrong into the wrong port, right? There's usually some user error on this. That said, software has problems, has bugs, but, unless you install an upgrade or a patch or something, you usually see those right fairly quickly. There's race conditions and stuff, but so my thing usually whenever we had an outage, are like, "What changed?" What is your, the day-to-day, what are the team doing? Are they doing mostly installs and maintenance? Are they doing monitoring and repair? You got a whole mix of it? Or because 'cause I'm interested in this space. I'm actually if I ever went back to managed service provider in the IT world, it'd be because I bought either a data center or bought a big, MSP.
Yes. So on a day-to-day basis, we have different teams of people doing pretty much everything you described. We have, let's see, just shy of 50 people. So this was a decent size company to acquire. And because we have an installed base that represents the recurring revenue, we're
Mhm.
constantly servicing, monitoring that tech stack, right? Everybody talks about the tech stack. We have project teams that are implementing new sales, whether it then goes into our recurring revenue bucket, or these are one-time IT project sales where we're putting in new servers, hardware and equipment, what have you. So it runs the full range. No day is the same, certainly around here.
I imagine you guys have people who are specialized in all the connections between software too, the API guys. That was one of the biggest problems we ever had. Okay, we have to install this patch into this software program, right? Or there's a new upgrade for the software and everybody wants to install it. And all of a sudden the API changed and all the things that plug into it and use it, all the reports and all the other stuff, you got to go run around and fix a bunch of other stuff. I come from prior military experience and worked for Lockheed Martin as a test engineer for a while. So I've built up like little test labs. So we'd install it, we'd run a test scenario through it and see what broke. Like, are there anything that break? Do you get a lot of break fix where you were asked to upgrade a piece of software or a tool and all the stuff that plugs into it breaks?
Well, those things do happen, and it's certainly, where I think those situations for us at least, we're coming in kind of on the backside of that, right? So it's not that we certainly do everything you just described of running test environments, and we're not introducing harm when we do updates, new certificates, what have you. But yeah, I think one of the things you see in this business and in any services business is you get called in to fix the previous person's mess up, right?
Yeah, a lot of people build things into, like, unique configurations is the nicest way I can put it. They installed it, they made it work, they got it to work, but it wasn't maybe necessarily exactly how it was designed to work. So when you go and make a change, all of a sudden you're like, "Why did it break? It should have never broke." So it's the previous guy found a special special way to fix it, and that special way to fix it doesn't work anymore. Let's go back to the acquisition side of the thing. What were some of the things you learned through this process that if you were to acquire another one for growth or for any other reason that you might change? What would you do differently from your lessons learned?
The experience that I've had with the accelerator program and being able to acquire a business of this size, I think it's larger than what most would be able to pull off on a self-funded search. It has been great for me. No complaints, no regrets. We're having a lot of fun. However, what I advise people, searchers, prospective searchers, is if you want to go down this road, you owe it to yourself to really spend the brain cycles and think through each of the different models that you can do a search around and be very thoughtful about a individual search, self-funded search. I basically recommend folks, if you can, do a self-funded search. The reason for that is, one, you essentially become the single largest, if not the only shareholder. So having complete control has a lot of advantages. But the other one is, unless you've really held the checkbook to millions of dollars, I don't think you understand how much money that really is. And so to have all of that for yourself as a single owner is incredibly powerful for you personally. So if you can pull it off, I would recommend giving some serious consideration to self-funded.
Interesting. So, yeah, I didn't think about that because now you have kind of a board, right? You have somebody who, because you were through the program you're in, they play some role into that. Now, did they have a exit criteria for you, like, on their investment? Are you looking at a 5-year project, or is it debt structured? Are you gonna pay them back? How does their continued involvement either fade out, or does it continue to work with you?
Sure. So on the transaction structure, it is very typical of a traditional search fund where, we use a certain amount of leverage. In this case, it was traditional bank financing. I was fortunate to find a bank that didn't require a personal guarantee. I think that's the other thing. If you're doing a traditional search where you're not the majority, you, the searcher, are not the majority owner, and you have to put a personal guarantee, you can still get fired, right? So you got to be really careful about that. So, we found a great local bank partner, required no personal guarantee, gave us a real nice line of credit right from day one. We did debt plus equity plus some small amount of seller financing. So, a very normal structure. We do have a board, a formal board of directors. I think one of the great things about this particular program is I'm on the board and I had a lot of influence on who the other board members would be. So some come from the cap table, and some come from independent points of view. And so I have a really great board, people that I've known and worked with for a long time, and I enjoy those meetings. I get a lot of value out of them. In terms of the exit, just like traditional search, it isn't so much a time constraint, it's an IRR constraint, right? So the person in my role gets the maximum benefit at the higher the IRR return. So whether we pull that off in 2 years or 5 or 6, it's really just about the rate of return.
So I was curious because people are gonna wanna know that. A lot of people don't wanna do the sponsored search because they think that, okay, now I have to sell it. Whatever I buy, I'm going to have to sell it in 5 years or 10 years because there needs to be a liquidity for the other investors. And that's the same. And that goes with any time you take on investments. It either needs to be a debt structure where you're paying them off with interest over time, which happens. I've seen, I didn't even know that happened in this space until I was into it for almost a year. And I talked to some people who raised debt capital to acquire companies, not through just banks, but even through independent like family offices and stuff. So, now, knowing that's possible is one avenue, but the other one is if you take on equity financing to buy these companies, then there has to be a liquidity event at some point, or otherwise those investors never realize. So you're either not going to do a 30-year hold, or you're going to have to find a way to buy those investors out at a certain period of time.
Yeah, that's a very good point that I think also needs to go into a potential searcher's calculus of which way do they want to go. If you go the traditional route, as you just articulated, you have to generate a return in some way, shape, or form. Could be,
Mhm.
a total exit, could be some other mechanism to buy them out. But in the traditional search model, if you want to maximize your own benefit and achieve those, 25 plus, 30% plus IRR hurdles, you're basically looking at doubling the size of the business in some time frame. So I heard somebody very recently articulate these businesses have been around for 20 years plus. They most likely have not been on a rate of doubling in size every 3 to 5 years. And then, you hotshot MBA, McKinsey Consulting, whoever you are, come in and, oh, well, now I'm going to be the one that can double the size of the business. Like, what in the world do you know that the 30-year owner didn't know? So, my point of that is not to underestimate the challenges of doubling the size of a business or at least significantly upsizing it, which you have to do in the traditional search fund model, as opposed to the self-funded search where you buy a great steady business, maybe it's, somewhere between 500,000 and a million of SDE, and you as the individual own it and can hold that over an extreme time horizon. Boy, putting $1 million a year in your pocket over 20 years is pretty powerful.
Absolutely, absolutely. So people don't get that though. They don't understand. Some people will jump into the search fund and like, hey, I don't have the funds. That just because they think that, well, I don't have $1 million sitting in any liquid account right now. I'm not going to be able to buy this. I have to go this other route. And there's just so many different avenues. You can raise debt capital to where at some point it's yours. You can do these other structures where let's sell leasebacks on real estate. There's just so many different avenues, but to keep their eye open and to be open for other strategies. And for your point of doubling in with the next 5 years, the only consistent way I know companies can do 20, 30% a year and double every 3 to 5 years is through other acquisitions. That's why the PE firms are able to do 30% growth year over year because they're acquiring companies, right? They're buying up smaller competitors. And, sometimes it's the minnow that swallowed the whale. Some of these guys are buying up bigger competitors.
Yeah, I generally agree with you. I've seen that 10 to 20% growth in previous parts of my career. So it is possible. But kind of one of my favorite quotes I've heard since being in this world is, and I forget who said it, but it was the fastest way to double the size of your business is with your signature.
Yep. I love that one. So I haven't heard that yet. That's a good one. The fastest way. It's also the truth. You got to be careful though, because it's the fastest way to make a small fortune is out of a big one, right? So you could buy
That's
the right
that's right.
company. Yeah. Somebody says, "How don't you know?" I have people ask me all the time because they know I used to own a real estate investment firm. So, how do you make a small fortune? Like start with a big one. That's the fastest way to make a small fortune. Start with a big one. Be careful what you wish for, because I actually started a book many years ago. One of these days I'll finish. It's called the book's title is "Get Rich Quick My Ass." And it's because none of this stuff is get rich quick. None of it's easy. There's work to be done. You've got to build specialties. You've got years of experience, and now you're learning on the job, right? Anybody who pitches this as something that you can just go buy a business and be rich overnight, you better be ready to work. I don't see that. There's no such thing as passive income in this that I know of, other than buying something that's got a dividend. And you probably ought to check on their quarterly, at least read their quarterly reports on a regular basis.
There are no shortcuts. I enjoy it, but I work, I don't know how many hours, but I basically work every day, all day. Since closing, I've come to the office every Sunday. I drag my kids into the office with me on Sundays, and they enjoy it. It's super fun. But I mean,
Hmm.
that's what you're signing up to do. You have to answer the phone Saturday at 9 o'clock at night. Like, you don't have the option to not answer your phone.
Let's do some takeaways. If somebody is in there listening to the show, they're thinking about going down your path. They're going to buy a tech company or a managed service provider company. What would be the biggest takeaways? Like if they could only think of one or two things to remember from the show, what would you want them to walk away with?
If we're talking specifically about looking at these types of businesses, you got to get into the weeds of the contracts, the customer contracts. That's where the value is. So you need to understand those. And then I always tell people get reps and warrants on your accounts receivable.
Yeah, that's a good one. And a lot of people like if you're new out there, you don't know what reps and warrants are. Google it. Make sure your attorney does. Quit using your damn family attorney that set up your two startup LLCs to try to do a mergers and acquisitions deal. They don't understand that phrase yet, and it will kill you. I was trying to buy a company, and the attorney we were looking at were using sent something over. It had reps and warranties in it, and the other attorney was like, "What the hell is all this?" And it was standard boilerplate stuff. It was nothing special. And I come to find out his divorce attorney was trying to sell his business for him. The same guy that, was helping him with divorce. The reason he was selling his business is in divorce. And it turns out the attorney he hired to help him look at selling the business was his general practice attorney, but did divorce and general business. It was a small town. And I'm thinking, this guy has no business. When the deal bust on that, I called the attorneys like, look, you're not doing this guy any favors. You're actually hurting him. It's like, I'm doing this as a favor. I'm not an attorney. I can't give you legal advice, but I'm telling you, if I was a family member of his and I figured out you do that, I would see if I could hold you liable for what you're doing to his business. Like, you're not doing him a favor, right? Find in mergers and acquisitions the attorney that knows what they're doing, that knows what those terms look like, and make sure, because nothing I gave you was special. It was all boilerplate. It was all stuff that everyone I've ever seen had in it. We hadn't even got to the special stuff because we were still in the middle of the due diligence. We gave you a sample. This is kind of what it's going to look like. So good one. The other one is not, a lot of people think all contracts are, you call it assignable, and better read the language of those contracts. Is not everything. No, not everybody believes that. And the last thing you're going to do is buy a company where the customers don't understand that the new buyer can be assigned those contracts and own them, right? Because then you're in the mode of like having to go out and renegotiate contracts with all your revenue, and it's not a place you want to be in. Now, that's the one thing we didn't get to. How well, before we jump real quick, how well did it go with the customers, right? When you got introduced to the customers, did you keep them all? Does everything go well with that, or?
Yeah, our customer retention has been great, and I think in some cases relationships have improved. I think it's natural in any business. We all can observe and make a judgment on somebody's stage in life, and you wonder,
Mhm.
well, what's going to happen here? And I think some of them saw some surety of the future of this company and the partnership provides comfort. So that's been good.
Awesome, awesome. Well, if somebody wants to work with you or sell you the managed service provider, or how would you want people to reach out to you and or connect with you?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest place. Just find my name, Nick Akers, in St. Louis. Should be pretty easy to find me.
Awesome. Well, we'll put that in the show notes. Thank you for being here for today, and hang out for a few minutes, and we'll call that a show. I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between 5 million and 30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.